Hi. So your triggers have something to teach you. The reason I'm giggling is because today I wrote that down as what I wanted to talk about tonight, and not 5 minutes after I wrote it down, one of my clients called me up or she messaged me with voice messages saying that her ex had done something and was being a pain in the bum and upsetting her eldest daughter, and was refusing to sign some paperwork or something. And my client had completely gone off her tree. Her daughter, who's 17, got really upset and was throwing a fit, and they were both just completely in a terrible state. And so, obviously he is her trigger. And it was all about control. And he was not going to sign some paperwork that would allow his daughter to have a passport. And he was saying, if you do this, I'll sign this. And if you don't, then, she misses out on her trip and you miss out on the school trip. And so it really triggered my client, and it really triggered her daughter. And so I had the opportunity to say to her, well, what are your triggers teaching you? How often does this happen? What's going on? So we had a bit of a chat about it, and apparently he does set them off quite frequently. And I said to her, so this is really important because this is a trigger, and him not getting his way makes him make certain threats to you, and he withholds information or support, or he says stuff and you just fly off the handle, and your daughter is going bonkers as well. So remember, I've said before many times, you learn what you live. So what are you teaching your daughter by going berserk every time your ex stirs you up? Because the only reason that there's drama is because you're buying into it. You getting upset, you allowing your daughter to fly off the handle and get upset too, you fueling that he wins every time this happens. Every time you let him trigger you, every time you react to him, he wins whether he knows it or not. So I said to her, what's a different way that you can react to this? What can you learn from your trigger? And she was in a bit of a state, so wasn't really quite thinking about solutions, and that's the value of having a coach. So I said to her, how about you teach your daughter a very valuable lesson? And how about you take the oxygen away from this fire? And how about you show your daughter how to handle this with class and grace, and calm the hell down for a start? And suggest to your daughter that she sends a message to her dad saying, look, I'm not going to play this game. I'm sorry that you feel that you have to do this. I'm not going to do it. He was being incredibly unreasonable, by the way. I'm not going to do what you want me to do. And if the consequence of that is that I miss my school trip because you won't sign for my passport, then so be it. And so my client had the courage to speak to her daughter about that, and that's exactly the message that the daughter sent. And my client was going to miss out on several $1,000s because it was a non-refundable school trip, and the passport wasn't going to be signed for, and she had encouraged her daughter not to react. And not 10 minutes later, he called my client and said, okay, that backfired. Did you know that our daughter has messaged me and said that she's not going to, bite? I'll sign the paperwork. So it was a big lesson for my client and for her daughter that could have gone really badly, because the trigger was, he makes unreasonable threats and or alludes to quite threatening behaviour when he doesn't get what he wants, and they have both always just complied, and inside of that gotten incredibly resentful and fought with each other and carried on like pork chops at school, or whatever it is. It's caused a lot of trauma. But by taking the oxygen away and not playing the game, because like I said yesterday, drama doesn't just walk into your life. You either create it, invite it, or associate with it, or they refuse to associate with it. Like certain situations can't occur if you don't play, if you refuse to play. So what the mother learned was not to, to acknowledge what the trigger was, and not to buy into it, and also she learnt that her behavior was teaching her daughter to behave badly and to react and to be manipulated by somebody. So had that continued on, her daughter never would have really had a voice moving forward, because people like that in her life in the future, because it comes around over and over again until you learn the lesson, would have been able to manipulate her. But because she consciously chose to calm down, not buy into it, and to respond differently rather than reacting to the trigger, she certainly got a different result than what she expected, and she taught her daughter a big lesson. And then I was talking to somebody else this evening about triggers and about the way that our brain tries to protect us. So it's fight or flight. We get this big adrenaline rush when somebody says something or does something, or we smell a particular smell that might bring back the memories of a trauma, or we hear a certain song. Our brain uses that to anchor the trauma. So it might be hearing your ex's voice, or it might be hearing a certain phrase from somebody you love very much that an abuser used to say to you. So it's said with a completely different tone, but your brain still remembers that anchor of, that's what was said during the trauma, or that's what I smelt during the trauma. And it's just about acknowledging what that trigger is, what sets you off, whether it's a song or a smell, and how you're going to deal with that differently. So whether that's somebody's continuing behavior, if you've got exes in your life and you have children between you, then you're going to have to deal with that for quite some time. So it's about, how can I deal with this differently? Because if you explode, if you react rather than respond, if you let it upset you, if you lose sleep over it, if you rant and rave and gossip to other people about it, God knows I did it for years when I very first left, my first partner. That's keeping it alive. So they win whether they know about it or not, because you're stressed out about it and you're carrying on about it, and that impacts everybody around you, and you've got to remember that your kids are learning that too. So my client taught her daughter an incredibly valuable lesson today, and no doubt they'll have a wonderful conversation about it later. I've just spoken to her again just then, got off the phone, and she's in a beautiful state, and she even said to me, you know what, had I not stopped and thought about what set me off, had I not figured out how to deal with it differently, I still would have been upset. I would have lost sleep. It would have exploded and gotten worse. I would have reacted. I would have tried to get back at him. I would have resisted. Quite often, just stopping resisting something stops it. It hasn't got control over you if you refuse to play. So have a think about that. What are your triggers? What can you learn from them? That's me for tonight. Have a great night. Bye.